Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive into some EU innovation today. We're looking at Horizon Europe and,
Yeah.
trying to make sense of it all, right?
Absolutely. It's a lot to unpack, but there are some seriously interesting ideas in here about how the EU sees this whole innovation thing as a team effort. They call it an ecosystem. Pretty interesting stuff.
An ecosystem. Okay, I like that. So the article we're looking at mentions this knowledge triangle approach. What's that all about?
So picture a triangle, right? And at each point, you've got government, academia, industry. The EU's thinking is that real innovation, like game-changing innovation, comes from these three working together, feeding off each other.
Makes sense. You can't just have brilliant minds off doing their own thing. You got to connect the dots somehow.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. The EU doesn't just want to be the bankroll in this whole setup. They want to be active innovators themselves.
Hold on, the EU, an innovator. How does that even work?
Well, take regulatory sandboxes, for example. These are like controlled spaces where companies can try out new tech, new ideas, without being bogged down by regulations.
So a safe space to experiment, see what works without jumping through hoops.
Exactly. A testing ground, if you will. Companies can refine things before they go live, which I think is pretty cool.
It's a smart move.
Yeah.
Sounds like they're all about striking that balance between encouraging creativity, but also, not letting things run wild.
Right on. And that same thinking applies to how they view academia in all of this. Open science is a big deal in Horizon Europe. Basically, making research data more open, moving past that whole thing of just publishing in academic journals.
So more accessible research. That's got to be huge, especially for researchers or institutions that might not have the resources for those expensive journals. Although the article did mention some debate around this open science thing, something about how we measure impact.
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? Traditionally, you measure a researcher's impact by how often their work gets cited in those academic publications, right? But with open science, there's a push for valuing real-world impact. Like, how is this research actually making a difference in the world?
Which is ultimately what matters, right? I mean, a big discovery is only as good as its ability to solve real problems.
Exactly. Horizon Europe is definitely trying to find that sweet spot. But the article hints that it's still a work in progress. This is where industry comes into play, and it gets really interesting.
Okay, industry.
Yeah.
What role do they play in this knowledge triangle?
So the EU, that innovation isn't just about having a eureka moment. It's about turning that moment into something tangible. That's where businesses, whether they're startups or big corporations, come in. Horizon Europe is really stressing the need to support them throughout that entire process, especially when it comes to overcoming, the infamous Valley of Death.
Right, the Valley of Death, where great ideas go to die because of a lack of funding or resources. How does Horizon Europe help them navigate that?
That's where the European Innovation Council comes in, the EIC. It's not just about grants. They're all about providing support, connecting startups with investors, mentors, potential clients, the whole shebang.
Like a one-stop shop for getting those innovative ideas off the ground.
Pretty much. And that's where those acronyms you mentioned earlier come into play. Horizon Europe is just one piece of the puzzle. You've got things like the European Structural and Investment Funds, ESIF, focusing on regional development. And then there's the European Fund for Strategic Investments, EFSI, which is all about attracting private investment in, strategic areas.
It does sound pretty complicated, this whole web of funding programs, which I get. It's great the EU is putting so much emphasis on innovation, but wouldn't all this complexity be a bit of a headache for someone trying to actually access those funds?
You're not wrong. The article does point that out as a potential stumbling block. It's something to keep in mind for sure. But before we disappear down that rabbit hole of funding mechanisms, let's loop back to something you mentioned earlier, the social and environmental side of innovation.
Because it's not all about tech and profits, right? We've got to consider the impact on people and the planet.
100%. Now, the article doesn't have a separate section for this in Horizon Europe, but it seems like they're trying to weave it into everything they do. Like, they've pledged to dedicate a quarter of the Horizon Europe budget, 25%, big number, to tackling climate change.
Wow, 25%. Okay, they're putting the money where their mouth is on that one.
Yeah.
What about the social impact side of things? How do they address that?
Well, citizen science is one way. It's about getting the public involved in research projects, people contributing to scientific breakthroughs, and at the same time, making sure research is aligned with what people actually want and need.
So it's like democratizing scientific discovery. I love it.
Right. And they're also big on social innovation, basically finding innovative solutions to social challenges.
This all sounds promising, but I keep coming back to that complexity we talked about. With all these different programs and criteria, it must be overwhelming for some, especially smaller organizations, to navigate.
Without a doubt. And the article doesn't shy away from that, highlighting it as a potential challenge. All those intricate funding programs could end up hindering innovation instead of helping it, particularly for those who aren't familiar with how the EU system works.
Which brings us to a crucial question. Can the EU make these funding mechanisms more accessible, more user-friendly,
Yeah.
Without compromising their commitment to supporting innovation? That seems like the key.
It's a tough balance to strike, for sure. And this ties into a broader question that the article touches on: the EU's place in the global innovation landscape.
What do you mean?
Well, we've talked about the EU wanting to be a global leader in innovation, but the reality is they're up against some stiff competition, especially from the US, particularly when it comes to attracting top talent.
Silicon Valley, right?
Yeah.
It's like a magnet for bright minds. So how can the EU compete? Do they need to take a totally different approach?
That's the million-dollar question. And the article suggests that the EU might have a secret weapon: its quality of life. Europe has this rich history, diverse cultures, a really strong social safety net. All of that adds up to a pretty great quality of life, which could be a huge draw for top talent, people looking for something different.
Instead of trying to be Silicon Valley, maybe the EU's strength is in offering something, more balanced, a place where people can have a life outside of work, right? And that ties into how Horizon Europe itself is structured, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Think of it like a house. Each level is a different pillar of the program. So you've got the foundation, excellent science, that's all about supporting fundamental research, the scientists pushing boundaries without necessarily knowing where it'll lead.
Laying the groundwork for future innovation, basically.
Yeah.
Today's abstract research could be tomorrow's big breakthrough, right?
Exactly. Then we go upstairs to the main living space of our innovation house. This is global challenges and European industrial competitiveness. Now we're talking about solving real-world problems: climate change, healthcare, digital transformation, and making sure Europe can hold its own on the world stage.
So tackling global issues while also staying competitive, it's a lot to juggle.
Tell me about it. And then we reach the top floor, Innovative Europe. This is where they're trying to build a supportive environment for startups, scale-ups. Those are the real drivers of economic growth and jobs.
Love the house analogy. We've got the foundation of basic research, the middle level tackling those big problems, and then the top floor buzzing with entrepreneurial energy. Sounds great, but even the best house needs, a budget. What kind of numbers are we talking about here?
Well, strap yourself in, because the proposed budget for Horizon Europe is a whopping 95.5 billion euros.
Whoa, okay. That's a pretty hefty chunk of change.
It is. But keep in mind, that's spread out over 7 years and across all 27 EU member states.
Right, so maybe not as massive as it sounds initially, but still a serious investment. Shows how committed they are to this whole innovation thing. But how is that budget actually divided up? Which pillar gets the biggest slice?
No surprises here. The lion's share, almost 50%, goes to the second pillar, global challenges and European industrial competitiveness. Those big challenges need big solutions, and big solutions need, big money.
Right, makes sense. Those global challenges aren't going to solve themselves, and the EU definitely wants a seat at the table, if not leading the charge.
Exactly. And within that pillar, there's a lot of emphasis on climate change and going digital. It's all about a sustainable, tech-driven future, the EU's vision for things.
Walking the walk, not just talking the talk. But what about the other pillars? Does that mean excellent science gets left behind?
Not at all. It gets a decent chunk of the budget, just not as much as the second pillar. After all, you got to have that strong foundation of research, right?
It's about playing the long game. Investing in basic science now can pay off big time down the line.
100%. Now, the third pillar, Innovative Europe, gets a comparatively smaller piece of the pie.
Interesting. You'd think with all this talk about startups and competing with Silicon Valley, they'd be throwing more money at that.
It's a fair point. And the article does mention that the EU is looking at ways to streamline things, make sure the money's being used effectively. It's all about finding the right balance. You don't want to spread yourself too thin.
It's definitely a delicate balancing act. But what strikes me is the sheer ambition of it all. The EU isn't just dipping their toes in the water. They're diving headfirst into this whole innovation game.
Oh yeah, they're all in. And while it remains to be seen how it'll all play out, one thing's for sure: they're determined to make their mark.
Which is what makes it so exciting to follow. But we've got to circle back to that big question. Can Horizon Europe really turn the EU into, the global innovation leader? Or will it get bogged down by Bureaucracy, risk aversion, all that.
Those are the million-dollar questions. And while the article doesn't give us a crystal ball, it does offer some interesting perspectives. Like, it points out that Europe's unique strength, its history, its culture, its focus on quality of life, those could be major advantages in the global innovation race.
So not trying to outspend or out Silicon Valley the competition, but playing to their strengths.
Exactly. Creating an environment that attracts a different kind of innovator, someone who's not just chasing after money, but wants a more well-rounded life. And that brings us right back to the knowledge triangle we were talking about before.
Right, that whole idea of government, academia, and industry working together.
Bingo. And the article seems to think the EU is in a really good position to make that happen. They've got a history of supporting research, a strong network of universities and institutions, and a startup scene that's just getting started, really.
It's like they're playing a different game altogether. It's not just about economic growth. It's about a better quality of life, a sustainable future. It's ambitious.
Totally. But can they actually pull it off? Can they create an environment where innovation thrives, not in spite of those values, but because of them? That's the big question, isn't it?
It really is. And that's what makes the EU's approach so interesting. They're not trying to copy Silicon Valley. They're trying to do their own thing, something that reflects who they are.
And as we've seen, that means collaboration, focusing on making a real difference in the world and believing that a good quality of life can actually drive innovation.
It's a bold vision, no doubt about it. But we've also talked about the challenges. The complex funding system, the need to cut through red tape, the competition for talent.
Right. And we can't forget that tension between wanting to shake things up with disruptive innovation, which always comes with risks, and staying true to those core European values of social responsibility and sustainability.
It's a balancing act, for sure. But the EU has never been afraid of a challenge. And with Horizon Europe, they've laid out a pretty ambitious plan for the future of innovation.
A plan that could have a huge impact, not just in Europe, but globally. Imagine if innovation wasn't just about profits, but about building a better, more sustainable world for everyone. That's the potential of Horizon Europe.
It's a journey worth following, that's for sure. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's worth leaving our listeners with one final thought. What if the key to real transformative innovation isn't about copying what others are doing, but about forging your own path, one that prioritizes collaboration, sustainability, and the well-being of people and the planet? Something to think about.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the heart of European innovation. Until next time.